Joining us now, Chase Untermeyer. Chase Untermeyer was the United States ambassador to Qatar from 2004 to 2007 on the appointment of President George W. Bush. He's a 1980 graduate of Harvard, honors in government. He served during the Vietnam War as an officer to the U.S. Navy, been on our show many times. He's been in politics. He served in a bunch of White Houses, and he's an author of several books on Reagan and Bush. And he's with us now, and he now does audio books, which I'm now intrigued with. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, plus the goings-on of the day. Ambassador Untermeyer, great to have you back, sir.
Thank you, John. Always a pleasure to be with you.
So here's what I want to start with. You're a big fan of George H. Bush, and you served with him for a long time, and you're also a fan of Reagan. But let's go to George W. Bush, because that's a little more contemporary than Reagan 80 to 88. If what is happening now was happening under George H. Bush's presidency, what do you think he would do?
Are you referring to the pandemic? Or,
yes, both. Well, not so much a pandemic, because we didn't know about it. But right now, during these protests, and George H. was very sensitive to this stuff, as you know. What do you think? What would he do now? What would his reaction be? I'm just trying to draw a contrast.
Well, we know from George W. Bush's point of view what he believes, because he issued a very eloquent statement on that just a few days ago, in which he recognized the divisions and the tensions within American society, history of by some people against other people, and that he has faith, as I have faith, in America to be able to correct that. I reject the notion that somehow intolerance is in our DNA. I think the history of America has shown that we are improving, and that was the very encouraging message we heard from Dallas.
You know, it was interesting. The Bushes have a history of not letting things escalate. Now, except for the war, which I'm not in favor of. We've already had that discussion too many times. But their history has been to de-escalate things, right? So I was kind of imagine if either Bushes were present, like what would they be doing now? And it would probably be a much more conciliatory tone than we're getting now, I would think, right?
It's very hard to put people from the past into the present.
Right.
But we can say that in 1992, when Los Angeles erupted in the aftermath of the verdicts in the Rodney King case, that President Bush the First was both understanding about the passions raised by that, but he also supported the governor of California in asking that the National Guard be sent into those areas of L.A. that were affected by the riot. So it was a combination of both sympathy and strength that led to calming that situation.
Yeah, I mean, I remember specifically when he said in the National Guard, and I remember him saying that, until we can get the streets under control and people are safe, we can't really have a dialogue, right? Remember that? And so you're right. I think you had a good combination of that. You've got one of your books out, Zenith, in the White House with George H.W. Bush, where you talk about your memoirs of the Reagan-Bush era, insiders look at the first Bush administration. But I want to talk about the Audible books, which is kind of new. There's some people hooked on it, some don't. I mean, I don't really do it either. Does my family? But now I was sent yours, and I just started it coming up here today, driving to Richmond. When I was first introduced to audiobooks, I had no interest in it because I'd just rather sit there and read it. And especially if it was done in somebody else's reading, because they're not giving the right emphasis, right? Because it's your writing. But you actually did the audio, Mr. Ambassador, on your own hook. So it's your actual audio in your voice. So therefore, you can better bring that to life, right?
There is a great advantage, you're right, in hearing an author read his or her own words to give that emphasis and, at very least, to be able to pronounce the names and places properly because so many professional readers don't have that particular body of knowledge. But I am an enthusiast about audiobooks because I live here in Houston and we spend a lot of our time on roads and freeways. And that 20, 30 minutes of one ride listening to a book, you can get through about a dozen books a year just on that kind of basis.
So to do one of these books, you've written for them, your most recent book, How Important People Act, which I'm going to get to in a minute. But, Mr. Ambassador, every time you do one of these, and you have to live read it, right? So you're going into a microphone after you've written a book. What does this take? Like how many days to do that? And does it have to be edited? How does this work?
Well, I have published books that are about 300 pages long, and it took me 20 hours in the studio to do that. And somewhat to my surprise, about a quarter of that time was not and did not end up in the final book. I didn't think that I had to repeat myself that much or take that many breaks, but it took that long to produce a 15-hour book. And I'll tell you, it is physical work. It's not as hard as building a road or a building, but it is still pretty demanding to be on your feet talking for 4 hours at a stretch.
I would think now. So you have to actually stand up and do this to put the emphasis in it, right?
Well, that's how I did it.
Yeah.
I suppose people could do it sitting down. For technical reasons, the studio where I work didn't have a good place to sit, so I stood up. And I guess from a voice point of view, that was
you project more, definitely. I mean, when I started in radio, I stood up. You know, now I sit down. I've been doing it for a decade, but I started. But even when I do an ad, which is the basis of my business, I'm in business to sell advertising. And so when I record an ad, I never do it sitting down ever because you want to project the enthusiasm into the advertiser you read. I've never done an ad sitting down in my life. I think I did it one time, and my producer was like, "Oh, that's flat. Stand up." So forget it. So I do that. You're on the John Fredericks Radio Network. We're with my good friend Chase Untermeyer. Chase, former ambassador of Qatar. He's got a lot. If I were to read you his resume, as I've always done, we'd be out of time. So we're not going to do that. But just suffice to say, it's a lot of stuff. He went to Harvard, and we're going to be right back with Chase Untermeyer, former ambassador, U.S. ambassador under Bush to Qatar in the Middle East. Stay with us.